if you wanted to pick up on that question now or maybe a bit later on, maybe we cycle back to
Russia
it.
Now?
Okay.
I don't know. Why do I think they are still problematic? I don't know. Why do you think they're not problematic?
No. You bring their name on as if there's something exceptional about these two. We know that there's a geopolitical tension between the United States and its allies with both Russia and China. So throwing it into the mix, it's almost like passively supporting the U.S. State Department's position on Russia and China.
Oh, come
so
on.
if you're going to do that, so we need to get into why would you support this type of vilification of China and Russia, which we often
No. You misunderstood me because
that's why we need to talk about it, right?
Okay.
And you brought up Russia and China. I didn't.
Well, why I brought them, it was specifically to say that they are. I don't think that towards them you can have this kind of good-bad position, which I was talking about before. I think that, for example, towards the regions that we've discussed so much in this conference, which are Asia and North and Central Africa and the Middle East. But maybe Middle East is still complicated. But we had. It seems like it seemed like we were all in agreement about the kind of position we should have towards them. And I don't think that any other regions were discussed that were brought up in any kind of way. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It didn't seem like. It didn't seem like there was anything else in the world except the relationship between these regions. And what I said was that there are other regions if we are talking about a global art world and about transnational exchange, and then and that there are different. I don't know. There are grades of relationship that you can have among these countries. And I think that, for example, for example, the role China is playing in Africa, it's also something worth discussing, which was not massively discussed in the conference. What I said was, I was pointing out some sort of lack in the geography. But I don't know if you want to go so deeply into geopolitics right now. I don't know.
No.
It feels like there's a resistance to it on the panel.
You suggest that these regions, the ones that were discussed more extensively, are chosen because they fit or allow a certain type of engagement more readily, more easily than other regions that would require different terms of engagement, and as we don't want to go there, it's too complicated, it's too this and that, that would be the reason why we avoid it, no? Yes, that's your point.
Thank you for summing up yes, that's pretty much it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Sorry.
Hong Kong is part of China, and in the talks program we do address China's activities in Africa. We've started doing panels every year. So this year we did a panel called China Africa, which was about an exhibition curated by Chinese Shen Wang, who's based in New York, and she showed two African artists, Samuel Foso was one of them, and He Xiangyu and another Chinese artist. So actually the reason I didn't bring it up was because actually I found it much more interesting for this gathering today was to think about methodology, actually, in some way.
And I would think in terms of problematism, should have brought up Kashmir. Natasha brought up Kashmir. We brought up the protests in Bangladesh. I don't think that was an accurate statement to say that the other regions weren't problematized. And there's one of our biggest supporters for our transnational work is actually the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. But there's not enough time to actually discuss all of these things. I think it's great that you brought up these holes, but I think it was also just a format issue. There's not enough time to discuss the whole planet.
I think it just raises an interesting point about the title of the whole conference and all the terms we've been discussing in terms of how we distinguish between the global and the transcultural, because I feel like the transcultural is not meant to be the entire world, and I hope that we do not claim to have covered or tried to attempt to address such an impossible task. So the fact that there have been these like moments of focus and clarity that are not, the same throughout, I think is a good thing.
Okay. One more question.
Can I just add something? That you began by saying that there were the poetic artists and the emphatic institutionalists. I don't think that's right at all. If I think of the work of Alexander Koch, I think of the people who were on the panel that I was with yesterday, there isn't this division. I'm not an institutional. I don't work for an institution. So, no, I don't. I'm free. And I think that these kinds of... So my question to you is, what is the rhetoric that you provide? Is it journalism? Are you is this the kind of thing that we would expect from a journalist? Or are you offering something from your perspective? Is this meant to be a kind of a summary of what you've seen so far from a journalistic, semi-objective position? Or are you providing something for our discussion?
Well, what do you think? I don't think I'm a journalist, first of all. I'm not a journalist. I was asked to summarize this.
Sure, but it seemed like you were, whether it's the question of geographies or whether it's the questions of the kind of the emphatic versus the poetic, I think these are not terribly helpful at the moment. I think what we're looking for are models and not shorthand descriptives. And so I wonder what model you would then offer.
Whether you are asking me of my own practice, or I don't understand my own practice.
I don't know what position you are coming from. It's impossible for me to tell on the basis of your summary.
I run a very small institution. I run a small off space in Bucharest, and planning to move actually out of Bucharest into more like the countryside. So for me, the interest lies in small scale institutions, and not even institution, I would say on small scale. And for me, the question of transcultural exchange would have to happen on a personal level. So I guess I am perhaps suspicious towards institutions and towards big networks and big events. And I think it was quite clear from what I said. I think it was a coincidence that the artistic positions that were presented were actually quite powerful. So I appreciated all of them. Perhaps if it had been, I don't know, artists who were less engaged with their practice, it would have been a different conversation. We could have brought up also the shortcomings of individual artistic practice, which we can still. I'm not saying it's an either or, although I think this either or is something that that Emeka was interested in discussing. But I do think that as a summary of this conference, I think the real tensions came when institutional practices and models were expanded upon. I think a lot of questions did rise, and I tried to address some of them and raise them again, perhaps because I could notice them not just with one person, but with rather many. So I'm not saying one is bad and one is good. I think that would be quite ridiculous and maybe, rude. But this is the kind of problems that I would raise, and I wanted to raise them to the audience, so not have just me respond to them. I really think it's an interesting point for people who listened to be able to.
But I'm grateful for your postscript, because I think it's important. And I assume that in this you are also taking into account all the Pecha Kucha participants.
Yes. Okay.
I'm wondering if I say okay again, there can be another question from the floor. So this panel is called Where Do We Go From Here? And I don't think it's any huge coincidence that the themes that we've been discussing over the past couple of days, we're discussing them in the current political climate of rising neo-nationalism. And one thing that I wanted to maybe bring to the table at this point, is a kind of huge and unwieldy question, but I'm just curious, is in this context that we see evolving around us, what is art's role? How has art's role changed? You know, has the urgency changed? Has the things that are possible changed? Maybe Tony?
Big question. That's a big question. Maybe we start by thinking, what is art? I know. What is the role? I mean, what is the meaning that art has a role? Why should it have a role? And things like this. But then, maybe leading to this, I mean, I would come to, if you give me just a couple of minutes, because I was thinking about this transcultural idea that kept popping up. Like a lot of ideas, like yesterday, I sort of like tongue-in-cheek, I asked, what is the West? Because everybody was talking from, let's say, a Western perspective, and they were saying that they're talking from a Western perspective, and I'm not from that West, so I was a bit perplexed, and it was real. So what is transcultural? Transcultural presupposes also that there are different cultures which are different, like radically different from one another, and are monolithic, and they have no trans going in between them. But then you think, okay, but we live in a world where global capital is everything. I mean, it's everywhere, and it's everything. And there is no culture that has not been touched, or even, I would say, destroyed by capitalism, in the sense that what is left? What is left is really very little. Just like sometimes the shell of something, like sometimes it's folkloric elements, sometimes it's, it's in my culture that something, sometimes it's food, but even food is being destroyed, sometimes it's, I don't know, music, or things that are not necessarily the domain of contemporary art. So also transcultural, I think, needs to be, I mean, it has been, people have been using it, I would say, innocently, in the sense that as if it is, ça va de soi, so it's like an obvious thing, but I don't think it's obvious. I think it also needs to be discussed and not taken for granted that there is something which is transcultural. So in that sense, what can art do? What is art's role? I actually was thinking about that, since I received the email. Yours? Maybe someone's. Asking us these questions. Was it you? Okay. Oh, hi. Hello.
Nobody's taking responsibility for the email.
I have like this long list of unanswered emails, so anyway. So I was thinking about it, and I sort of, to pick up on yesterday's conversation we had at dinner, I mean, some of us, there was this, in the second, third, and fourth century, when Christianity was not yet formed, right? So Orthodoxy, as we know it, was not formed. So there was a lot of ideas, and some of these ideas were called agnostic. These agnostics were many, and they had this idea of like there is a knowledge, and there are passages in the Gospels which prove that there is not a secret knowledge, but a knowledge which you cannot see, in the sense that it's in front of you, but you cannot see it because you have not been initiated to it. So anyway, some of them were pretty radical about it, and they said that this world that we live in, remember, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, this world that we live in, filled with wars and famine and hunger and poverty, and life which is intermingled with death, and love which is intermingled with hate, and sickness with health, and everything is wrong in this world. So this world could not have been created by the true God. The true God did not create this world, and actually the one who created it, this world that we live in, is some sort of a demigod, like a half-god. They called him the foolish god, the stupid god, who actually is the god of the Torah, of the Old Testament. And they called him like this because obviously they said, I mean, it could not have been, and the example they give I think is brilliant, because they said, how can God allow grail, grail, to fall violently on parsley leaves? Because parsley leaves are so defenseless and they cannot do anything. And then you have this grail falling on them. And they thought this is so cruel and it could not be accepted. So obviously it was not the true God who invented this, who created this world. And I can say the same about our world, right? So we're talking about art, and we are very comfortable. We flew over from all over the globe, and we are staying in nice hotels. Mine is really good, yeah. And we have all of these things, and we're sort of like discussing art. And I know I'm coming from a region which is extremely troubled, the Middle East. Revolution in Syria, for instance, or what happened in Egypt suddenly after there was a revolution, and then suddenly the military took over, and then you have a military dictatorship, and now nobody can say anything, and everybody is being put in jail. You have Saudi Arabia with a nutcase as the king, and you have Iran with these mullahs like ruling in the name of God, and then you have this dictator in Syria who, after a long revolution, succeeded in remaining in his place, and something that was not in the media, something that was not really publicized. They, 2 weeks ago, the Syrian government announced the name of the dead from Saidnaya prisoners, 68,000 just for last year. 68,000 people who are dead. So these were political detainees who were killed on the hands of this regime, and when they let prisoners out, among them was a 4-year-old who was detained for a long time. 4. Okay, so how, in this world, what is the role of art? So we have to describe this world. So this world of global capital, this world is capitalism that keeps on expanding, this world of where patriarchy is like ruining everything, like even the notion of love, the notion of beauty, everything. So what is the role of art? So I would go back to the Gnostics and look to who they called their Lord and Savior, who was Lucifer, the most beautiful angel, because they thought he was the only angel who rebelled against this false god. He's the only angel who rebelled against this false god. And so he is the liberator. But he does not liberate you by giving you. He does not give you freedom, because your freedom is yours anyway. But he liberates you by taking away your illusions. By taking away your illusions about this world. That there is hope in this world. That this world is beautiful. That that you can find beauty in this world. That you can contemplate in this world. Because, like for instance, like the Marina Abramovich chairs on Stadtbrücke, where you sit and you close your eyes and you contemplate and you think of Mozart. Okay, but then the world is fucked up. I'm sorry, but the world is as it is, and we all know how it is. And now somebody says, okay, I'm going to put a chair for you next to the river. And okay, so this is an example of what art should not do. An example of what art should do is to destroy everything. Destroy everything that can be destroyed, in the sense that there is nothing to be saved from this world that we live in. Nothing. So destroy. Huh?
We don't hear.
So destruction, how? Destruction also not going and destroying things like with a hammer, no, but destroying illusions, destroying, like this notion of hope, that there is hope, things are going to get better. So we have this conference and we feel better about ourselves, and the symposium, and then, we did something. We didn't do anything. There's nothing to be done except destruction.
Mm-hmm. Sabine, do you have a response?
It's really difficult to answer anything now. It was a brilliant speech he made. I mean, he's absolutely right to take the illusion is incredibly important. But on the other hand, whenever there was a wartime and really hunger and poverty and horrible situation, people were dying for culture. They wanted to go to a theater, they were asking for opera. The Biennale Venice happened although Europe was in wartime. I mean, yes, taking away the illusion, but continuing with art, continuing with culture, and putting as much power into it as possible, because it's probably the only way for real exchange, which is not in terms of somebody who wants to get rich or become famous or whatever. So it's an exchange between knowledge and cultures and traditions and time, which is, I would say right now, the most powerful thing, especially when you mention the growing nationalism.
So I'm trying to think of the right vocabulary for this. It's like palliative doesn't seem quite, it seems too soft somehow, but some sense of some compensatory factor in art. You know, I mean, I think part of the issue is that the times feel so urgent that it feels most like, okay, what you have to do is reflect, not ever move away from the main picture.
But I also think that Emeka perhaps had a thought on this, because you also had an intervention about intentions and actually knowing, doing the research behind the intentions. So maybe you have a thought on this.
First of all, I'll sort of respond slightly to what he said. I think that this whole idea of removing the illusion has to be context specific, because where I live in Nigeria, in Bariga, in Lagos, you don't need to remove anyone's illusion to know that they're actually making bread out of stone. You know, so you can't, tell them that the world is okay. You know, they know it's really fucked up. Yeah. So I think that we should really put it in context that, this removing of illusion should be happening in the West, really, where you have all the privilege and, like I always like to say, sometimes even knowledge is being treated as entertainment, and I think that is the greatest abuse of privilege, because elsewhere, that knowledge will really change things, and be very, very impactful and informative. So that brings me to, as an image maker, I like to, toe the line of John Berger here when he talked about photography and how there is nothing that we can, photography as art, and how there is really nothing in the real sense that we can invent. We cannot reinvent the wheel. However, what we can do is to take the conversation elsewhere, change where the conversation is happening and how it is happening. So, for example, who are the audience here? I've been doing this for 15 years, and it feels like an echo chamber every time. So I'm sort of overwhelmed by, everyone saying the same thing, but just in a slightly different way. So that's the first thing. As a photographer, as an image maker, I think that it's about how do we affect the audience, who's listening, who is going to take something away from this. We are here talking about this, meanwhile, Austria is being ruled by right wing. Donald Trump is driving, and we wake up and realize that he's been elected. And I was like, how did that happen? We were speaking to ourselves. So since about 9 years now, since 2009, I've been running this project called Invisible Borders, Trans-African project. So basically, every year, we bring African photographers, writers, and filmmakers together, and we travel by road across Africa. And while we travel, we live together, we create works, we reflect, we think, and we make all these useful encounters on the road. And the works we create are precipitates of those moments and those experiences. And so far, we've had 7 editions of the road trip, one of them being in 2014, a road trip from Lagos to Sarajevo. where we spent 4.5 months on the road. And the basic idea of this project is, first of all, to address the question of borders and all those imposed cartographies in Africa and how to remap, to reimagine them, which is something that is very, very urgent in relation to Africa, but not limited to Africa, of course. But most importantly is to enter this space where we can think, be proactive in thinking. And I think that this is very, very important in the African context where, we enter a space where we are not, we're not held back by, anybody or anything, just, do our thinking, have our own experiences and articulate all of that. So I think that, the experiences of things I've experienced being on the road where, after all the reading and all the being in the art world. By the way, I want to come back to that, the art world, because, some of us, we are throwing this word around, the art world. I think there are many art worlds, and it's very important, that we have that at the back of our mind, that there are many art worlds. And when I live here now and travel back to, of course, anywhere, art continues, really. Art continues. It happens on the street, on the road, and that is how, these are the things I've experienced being on the Invisible Borders road trip. And, for me, what is beautiful about this intersection between, I won't even say the artwork, I would say like the intellectual space, but also being an artist who is also very much interested in pedagogy or intellectual thinking, and is that I feel that it is, after all of this sort of like reflection and thinking, that when you go out on the, on the road, that you see all of that play out there in a very, very real and, believable, but also with a lot of life. And it has a different context. And I think that more of that has to happen. We have to take this conversation elsewhere. So, that's the point I'm trying to make. First is that we have to make, that removing of illusion context-specific, like everything. In fact, moving on, we're talking about how do we move forward. I think that the world has to become more context-specific, more multi-optional, in the sense that, change, even change itself can no longer be generalized. It's happening in all these little, forms and places. And we have to realize that, when we come together like this, what we're talking about is the mainstream. But outside here, it is really happening. And that has to be. So the work now is how do we bring all of that? How do we benefit from that? How do we articulate all of that? And how do we make connections, important correlations? So I think I'll leave it here for now.
I just want to say one thing quick. I think it says a lot about the persistence of this monolithic idea of the art world, that we can go through everything we heard yesterday and today in this idea of relation between worlds, and still be coming back over all that to this idea of an art world. So I think that's absolutely correct. Because there's always the question of how well these worlds were able to know each other. Yeah?
Yeah, I want to go back, both to the distraction idea and the geography, and the point that I was trying to make since the beginning about this kind of fixation of terminology or origins or borders. And I really, maybe I'm too romantic, but I tend to think that if we really want to make any kind of distraction, this is the thing, like changing our compass, but not only in geographic terms. Like if we hold this conference here or in Tate or in, which country, but also under which capacity, who feels entitled and who not, under which cultural context, like misappropriation, appropriation, And that's when you misappropriated me when I said that I'm a Western or non-Western curator, because this, no, it's important for me, doesn't mean a thing, really, in a kind of a reality. It means a lot, but what we're trying to do through our practice and what we try to do through Documenta 14 by multiplying its position, let's say, from one space to two, actually to two countries within Europe that happens to be in a kind of a rivalry, and of course it was not the document about these two countries, but when every day in the news is, Germany made 3.9 million over Greece by buying Greek bonds, while in Greece it's the most poor country after the Second World War that ever country of the First World was as poor, and of course, you were saying about Lagos. Lagos, thank God, now it has a booming economy. Of course, like stones of gold, bread of gold, bread of stone, everything is. But I'm just trying to say, and then at a certain point, I think it was Renzo that says, then Documenta has to go in more places. Yes, in 100 places. 100 of, I think that the emphatic institution is not exactly the problem, to distract this. The way we perceive of the institution is a problem. I think I am an institution on my own self. You know what I mean? And distraction on the same time has been highly institutionalized as well. Let's say in Greece we have a big kind of an anarchic tradition. And last year, the first page of New York Times, together with the artist that Renzo, had a huge kind of feature on the anarchists living in the center of, anarchists that they are active, they throw Molotovs and they were giving interviews and they were being photographed and everybody was so happy. So there is no chance. And I want to bring back to, really distract. Actually, there is a chance. There is the invisible committee that some of us might know. I mean, I don't know them personally, or I think I know some. You don't know if you know them. It's always a kind of that although they start from this distraction, their first book was The Coming Insurrection, and then they followed To Our Friends, and now they have their third book, which is called Now, and I think it's very much to the point that all of a sudden they're talking about continuity as the ultimate form of distraction. A real continuity. They live, in the countryside. They left Paris, let's say, and they somehow saw the kind of that the only weapon one can have towards this kind of capitalist empire. Let's put them all together. China, Russia, all the, it's a kind of a sense of daily continuity. And to this, I would want to bring back this point of how we have to always think of this kind of, Sueli Rolling puts it in a very good way. She calls it our capitalistic unconscious, that it's in all of us. I mean, it's hard to explain this feeling now, but we have to constantly and permanently, I think, challenge ourselves and our perception of the institution, of the borders, of ourselves, of colonial, of West, of South, like liberate from this, of the context as well. We said before that Documenta in Basel is the same thing, or this institution or the other institution, I just remember that. But when we speak of art worlds, in one way or another, Documenta, let's say, is a common for European taxpayers and, like German taxpayers. Well, there is an art world in Art Basel that thrives, makes millions of money with artists that we don't know. Of course, it's a good content, but it is another art world. We have to be conscious to what we are speaking of. We have to somehow not create, and also from the other side, the kind of pornography. I cannot say, I'm the poor Greek, let's make this into a kind of a new thematic to discuss upon, because that's a certain kind of a pornography as well, and it's also hegemonic, I think. So for me, I would just propose as a third way, fourth, fifth, sixth, to permanently transgress, permanently challenge, first of all, our own selves, permanently challenge the modes of identity, permanently change. And if I see art into this equation, I see it as a kind of a, let's say, good crack within this catastrophe that we still have the chance to sit here for like the last 12 hours or 2 days and discuss about situations as that, Not all of us, but And as you say, why here and who is the audience? But let's change the context, the compass. Let's multiply these places. Let's go in other places where people cannot get their visas out, not us necessarily, or everywhere. And I still believe why we give so much importance into money. Yes, a conference in somewhere else can have the same, impact. I think it's already changed. The impact already has changed.
Yeah, I agree in terms of changing the compass, and I think I would like to talk about again this book that I've been carrying around. It's by Toni Morrison. I'm selling it for her now.
Good.
Yeah, but I think it's a really good book. It's very small and easy read, but she's returning to this conversation about orders, and what was very striking for me, remarkable, is that she like Achille Mbembe in his book Critique of Black Reason returned to the question of the gaze, how we see. And as an image maker again, for me, I think this is where the conversation begins. How do we unsee ourselves in this conversation about differences? So we cannot change the compass. I want to believe that the compass you're talking about is a compass of the mindset.
Yeah, the mindset. That's what
Yeah,
I mean.
the mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and we cannot change that compass if we do not begin to change or begin to look at the gaze, how we see each other. And so there's an interesting quote from her here. Find. What did I just do now? Okay. Anyway, basically, she this quote. The danger of identifying with a stranger is to become a stranger. And I think that's really that's how she put it. Let me try to find it. Okay. So yeah, the danger of identifying with a stranger is the possibility of becoming a stranger. To lose one's racialized rank is to lose one's own valued and enshrined difference. So I think that there's, again, with our Invisible Borders project, this has been the premise. How do we, put that self that we carry with us, to test. How do we put it in a place where it becomes more precarious and shakes it up and shift it? So we often say that the invisible border is that distance between preconceived notion and freshly acquired perception. So what is inside it? So how do you challenge that self? And it's not an easy thing to do. So I think that in a way she is proposing that, but also she talked elsewhere about how images and language has been very instrumental in shaping what we see or what we believe is important to see. Now this is I think we have to get back to that before making refugee Facebooks and things like that. It's important that we understand how we see each other and where we are positioned in relation to each other, so that when we now make those Facebooks, we know how it is operating, and it is not just some misplaced good intention. And I think there's a lot of that flying around, even when we discuss. But we are always speaking from that place of privilege that we keep, because we refuse to make that journey, of that self, and it's not easy. And again, I speak in the sense of this Italian critic Umberto Eco, when he talked about how whether Europe likes it or not, the world or Europe will become multiracial. It's not even a question anymore. I remember when we were coming into 21st century, last decade of the 20th century, I came of age as an artist around 2002, 2003. That was also when I met Clementine for the first time, around 2004. I remember that there was all of that conversation about, otherness, that was pushed by, heralded by the likes of Okwemos or Simon Njami, Clementine involved as well in that community of, pushing that conversation. But it also led to, how everything became post. Everybody thought, oh, we've arrived now since everybody's been included now, or somehow. Okwi's done a documenta and blah, blah, blah. And then everything became post. But yesterday we've heard that, we shouldn't even be using post because it's all still there. So it means that we have to come back to this conversation again. But
No, we agree. There is other books too.
Yes. Yeah. Other books. There are other books. Definitely.
There's other books too. We can give you bibliography.
Yes, a lot of them. Like Achille Mbembe has written about, and these are people who are. The point I'm trying to make is that in a much more progressive, forward-thinking way, they are asking these questions: how do we now move forward? And the likes of Walter Mignolo, which is with his book on decoloniality, Gloria Veka, White Innocence, and even James Baldwin. Now we are even revisiting the work of James Baldwin again. And they are discussing, but in the sense of Humberto Eco's proclamations, that it's not even a question anymore. It is not like, the West laying claim to, Enlightenment age and Renaissance. We were the ones who did it. No, it's not like that. It's that it is inevitable. It's going to become multiracial. It's the world we're going to live in. So we might as well begin to, discuss our differences. If we don't begin from there, it's just going to be same thing.
I actually have some questions on my phone. I'm not looking at Twitter right now. One thing I'd like to ask here, one of the questions we had is, how can artists gain more exposure or agency or efficacy on their own terms beyond the structures of the Eurocentric art field, the structures that we have now? Anybody?
I feel really alienated on this panel somehow as a European being in the center of all the stuff which has to be changed. I mean, I'm traveling like hell to Biennales. I love to see as much art around the world in contexts I didn't know before and to learn a lot about it. I see I see less and less Western artists on the Biennales within, let's say, 16 years. It changed completely from, its beginning was probably 80%, now it's maybe 20%, 25%, almost no US Americans anymore. I mean, it changed so incredible, strong. I don't see that artists from all over the world showing more and more all over the world. I mean, it's anyway happening. And the gallery system, you're talking about art world, we have what the US Americans call the art industry. It's a parallel world. It's a very strong, powerful world. It's a horrible world. It's Art Basel and Art Basel and Art Basel. Art industry is something very, very different. That's mainly Western artists, I would say, for the high price market. But in the art world, with biennials, if you like them or not, but in this exhibition field, you see they have their places. I don't see how you want to change it. I mean, do they really need galleries everywhere in the world? Then they're in the art industry field.
You just said you see artists from all over the world, all around the world.
Yes.
I think maybe you see artists from all over the world, not all around the world yet. Maybe this is something we have to think, or what is
aspect of the question.
Yeah, not all around the world. We see artists.
So suppose we see artists from all over the world, everywhere in the world. Like, okay, so there are artists showing everywhere, and there are from everywhere. And then?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just want to. No, for me, it's a different thing to see the world together with artists from all over the world. You understand what I'm saying? It made a huge difference for us. I can speak only from personal experience. To share documenta between Athens and Kassel, not only in the sense that these were two images, a mirroring that would never superimpose each other. It was completely, because we worked on a way of inviting artists to do works in both places. the same, not the same work, the same artist. So it was evident that the world is different even within the small continent of Europe and other places. But also we invite the visitors to make this journey, whoever could, mentally or even. So I think already this is challenging an institution, any kind of institution.
Yeah.
Challenging or changing a form. This is a form of distraction. I wish it was 300 places.
Just to clarify, I wasn't being accusatory in my question.
No, I'm just being passionate. I'm not saying, I'm not answering in the defense.
My idea is that I ask a question, and then, because if this is the goal, and this is also a response to that question, what is visibility? Why do you want to achieve visibility? What is it about an artist showing everywhere? What is the goal? What do you want as an artist? What do you want? Do you want to talk to the world? Do you want to talk to the, to the world elite who understand your art? Or do you want to talk locally to people who are around you so maybe you can make a change? I don't know. I don't have an answer for this. But, I mean, for somebody to ask a question, how do I become visible without passing through the structures of Eurocentric? I don't know, maybe I'm misinterpreting the question, or is...
That's right.
Yeah, so why do you want to become visible? What is it about visibility which is so important?
And also the impact can come from everywhere. It doesn't have to go through Europe.
So this is why I asked the question, not to...
Yeah, no, but I'm saying that this is, I'm giving the answer of document as a way.
Yeah, okay.
That the multiplicity, I mean, of not only changing in the form of which artist, but changing also the form of a certain kind of exhibition that since 95 was operating on that way with some differences from Documenta 10 and onward. But now it's, we thought to...
I wasn't in Documenta, so I wouldn't know how to evaluate.
Yeah, okay. I'm just saying because I have not been in your... Yeah.
Yeah, and Sabine, I beg to differ a little bit, when you say, like, in almost an offhanded way that, everyone is everywhere. First, the way art is moving from, non-West, or let me say in this case from Africa to the West, is really, if you look at it, the trajectory is really reproducing or following, like colonial precepts, where, the place of production is somewhere in Africa or in India, and of course the market is in London or in Paris. So, and then that's one. So there's really something, we have to pay attention to that and say, well, there is something to be said about this. You can't say, well, all is going well, because it is following a model, a colonial model. And this is the problem. It is not just about moving, it is how it is moving that has to be changed. When you say change the compass, you also have to change, how it's moving. So I understand, I agree with you in the sense that, it's becoming more and more, but it's following a particular trajectory. That is, and this is the thing. Then secondly is that we know of the visa problems. It's a reality where, and even the funding, I think we experienced a little bit with the Summer Academy where, scholarship will go to, students who are already in Europe, but those ones who are outside Europe can't get enough scholarship for them to pay their tickets to come here because of how everything is structured. So these are the kind of things that that needs to be talked about when we say it is moving. It is not really.
But it is moving, and there are new models like what Diana is doing in Dhaka in Bangladesh. I mean, there are some places who try to bring up another structure and invent it. More. But it has to be done.
Yeah, but identifying that doesn't mean that it flattens out the problems that are there every day. That's for me. You see, this thing about making this, like talking about what is not working as mutually exclusive from what is working. For me, it doesn't work that way. We can identify where it's working, but also say, despite that, or it's also not working this way. So
but it would be fantastic if a new infrastructure would come up. Something. I mean, the whole gallery system is pretty much fucked up, except of the mega galleries. So fine, let's find another way of selling, trading art without galleries. But somebody has to do it. You can't just make it a demand out of it.
We have several people waiting questions from the floor. So.
Me? Okay, yeah.
Okay. You please.
Yeah, actually, Emeka, you kind of asked my question, but I wanted to reiterate in a sense that I think the question that you posed from your phone earlier, or the question that was being asked and being avoided, was perhaps less of visibility and more of, again, I mean, art is also a way of making a livelihood for people. It is as much about telling a truth of yourself, your people, your homeland, your things that have disappeared, perhaps, but, you know, the art world or like that industry is a lot of professionals. It's not just artists. It's also art historians, it's curators, it's gallerists, it's so many people. And then, I mean, I think we're going back to questions raised earlier that those positions, how do you break into that? Or why is it that the model, I mean, this is also a conversation that we were just having, which is that what is the museum model and why is that then so hard to crack? Why can that not be anarchic? Why is it so rooted in what it kind of were in a European model, or what is kind of what goes back maybe years and years, and that why is that not shifting? So perhaps those are some of the, or like how can, I mean, even for instance, like just now I was invited to come here because I applied for an open call, and something like an open call changes, radically alters the invitational access, or that you can then perhaps like put your foot in the door yourself without waiting for someone to open it for you.
I have a question to Tony. Coming back to Gnosticism. At what point do you think that art lost its initiatory codex?
Lost it?
At what point do you think that art, practice, art, the transmission of ideas around art, production of art, has lost its codex, its initiatory moment? If I just give you my impression is that it really began at the turn of the millennium, and that we've been going through a phase where the decoding procedure, the communicational abstinence, the saying no to something, not wanting to make everything that you do visible as an artist, to have yourself, it's even the notion of the underground doesn't quite work in the same way. But what is particularly important, I think, is this idea of initiatory knowledge. That you don't become an artist because you go and study somewhere. You don't become an artist because you just turn up at a biennale. You become an artist because you found an interlocutor. And that interlocutor can be multi-generational. It can take on different roles, different moments of passage, of transmission. And I would like to hear more about your understanding of initiate production, initiate knowledge today, how you conceive of it, where it lies. Does it mean that we're regressing into some kind of darker sphere where we won't communicate as much as before because we are being too open, too uncoded, too not sufficiently encoded, if you like? Could you develop this from your point of view of art practice, please?
I think I may have a tentative answer. It's not a definitive answer, but because it's on the spot. But I think that what you were talking about the decline of what you're talking about started from the Renaissance, from the beginning of the Renaissance, because art became something which was not. I mean, if you think of the Greek notion of art, that art is truth, and you think of the understanding of truth. So by truth is I return to this idea of the destruction of illusions, okay, which I spoke about earlier. So truth, now you were speaking of truth, but now I think we have two different, I understand truth in a very different way. Like the Greek way would be to say that truth is never achieved fully. So you can never, it's not achieved, revealed or unveiled. Truth is never unveiled in its entirety at the same time, at one point. So every time you get a part of the truth, another part would be hidden from, be occulted. So that's a very complex notion of being truthful, which is very much not what we got from the Romans, which is, look, this is a refrigerator. So this is what I just said is not true. Legally, it's not true because this is a glass. Okay, so the Roman notion is what we have inherited from the Romans is a very simple notion of truth and not truth. So in that sense, when you think of art as truth and when you think of the passation of knowledge, how do you pass on knowledge? This sort of, I was discussing this with Hildegard the other day. Said I wouldn't say upset, but it was a bit strange for me that, like sometimes in the classroom I would give my opinion about something, and then the student would say, "Okay, what do others think?" And I'm like, "Others? Okay, other students, right?" Which is very democratic and very nice and probably very European, but at the same time, this idea of like I thought I was the teacher, right? Yeah, I seem ridiculous now, but I think you understand what I mean. It's like this idea of like a person who is passing on his or her knowledge to somebody else in a very intimate way, intimate like from the mouth to the ear. That has stopped existing for a long time ago, and I think it's the Renaissance ruined it by inventing a world. Like it became all about visualizing a world through perspective, which is like a huge issue. I will not. But this idea of perspective, la géométrisation du monde, geometrizing the world, as we know. So everything becomes a quantity, which is capitalism, which is perspective, which is what we think of as great artists. They were just mere servants of capitalism.
But it's funny that now there's a comeback of this notion of truth in art. I was thinking of a project such as forensic architecture, which I suppose you're all familiar with, which is really trying to, I mean, maybe it's closer to the Roman understanding of truth, as in conformity with something, but it's interesting that it's really using an artistic model and an artistic practice.
Architectural.
But also a lot of working with, I think, the type of investigations that artists would do and visualizations, and I think they're taking a lot from that as well, but then using it for juridical purpose. I don't know if this maybe comes back to your question of truth, but whether you think it's still something possible to put onto the conversation again.
Forensic architecture thing. I think it's a very good project.
And truth as such, do you think, or maybe it's also a question for everyone, whether this is a notion that can still have a currency?
But you say juridico, and I think what they did is they are adding to the interpretation of the law, which is something quite different from this idea of, Israel is a perversion in itself. It's very perverted. The idea of Israel, this land given by God to a people. Which is, okay, so I can be, and we've seen footages of this on YouTube, like somebody would go into somebody's garden, and then the man would open, it's like, what are you doing here? He said, this is my land. He said, no, this is not your land. This was given by God to my people. You can find it on YouTube. So this perversion, when you counter it with something like what they're doing in forensic architecture, I think it could be very efficient. So my understanding of forensic architecture is from that perspective of that place, right?
They're not just working in Israel, but as
no.
a site.
True. But I know mostly the part about the occupied Palestine. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to speak to Sabine's point about art from all over the world. And I think it's important to also make a differentiation between people of color exhibiting and then the geography as well. Because just because you're a person of color exhibiting in the Venice Biennial, and then we have so many people of color, that's wonderful. But if you're from New York and London, and this is where you're based in producing work, we still have the same problem in terms of the global art market and things like this. The fact that Shireen Nashat is, an Iranian artist that's on everyone's lips is great. But again, she's a New York artist. So do we know other Arab artists? Do we know other Iranian artists? The fact that she is the first and only Arab artist, or Iranian artist that's actually in the introductory textbooks in art history that we teach our students. Again, she's a New York artist. So this idea of progress and how far we're coming, whether or not that's enough, that, she's now canon, is that really changing the conceptions of geography and where the artists are?
But is a demand that everybody wants to show in New York? I mean, I know so many Iranian artists because I travel a lot to the Sharjah Biennale, and of course you see a lot of Iranian artists there. I know a lot of artists from Pakistan because I've seen Lahore Biennale right now, and they show in Dubai at the art fair, in Sharjah. And you have all these biennales which have, in Indonesia, they have a huge exchange with guest lands. And I mean, yes, they are probably not in New York, but so what? I mean, is this a demand that everybody wants to show in New York?
Yeah.
No, but that's what I'm speaking to.
That's all.
I think that this issue is then an issue of privilege, because me, for example, as a Nigerian woman, I was born and raised in London. I'm afforded opportunities that, my cousins wouldn't even have just because they're still in Lagos. So I understand, your intervention as a matter of privilege, because, of course, it's thrilling to see so many people of colour getting these opportunities, but if it's all concentrated in, the idea of the West that we've been focusing on this weekend, I just don't think it's good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, but this is a political question. We can't solve the problem with visa. It's a question of money, and it's a political question between the countries who work the visa conditions.
Yeah, and beyond that, the whole system is still very much connected to capitalism. And so we can't forget that. And it's great, there's loads of POC artists being shown, but everyone is still trying to create a product to sell for millions and millions. And until we don't change our mindset, nothing is going to change really, or very, very slowly. So there's that issue, and there's also white supremacy, which I haven't really heard being discussed here.
If you don't change can you repeat? I didn't hear you.
If you don't change this capitalistic way of thinking, not much is going to change in everything that we've been talking here.
The compass. That's it, the compass here.
And we haven't really discussed that.
Yeah.
And the question of positioning ourselves is also really important, especially when we talk about institutions and acknowledging the privilege that institutions have. And I haven't really heard that either from institutional people. And so I'd like to discuss more the role of capitalism and white supremacy in everything we've talked about today.
But maybe other people want to.
Yeah, of course, the role of capitalism is immense, of course. Of course. But what I said, the art industry is. But it's not only capitalism. When Lahore and Karachi are doing a biennale, it's not about capitalism. It's because they want to have more visibility. They want to try to have.
It's because the artists that are chosen are still artists that have galleries, for instance. Why are we not changing that with the majority of the artists?
It's not. It's not that most of them.
As well. They always seek funding from galleries as well, and that's kind of
not always, and not everywhere. If you think of Venice, okay, but
I want to say something on that, though, because there are publications that commodify identity, and they are based on the money from galleries as well. So I don't think the capitalism is the elephant in the room. I think we have been discussing it for 2 days. But I think, no, we have to think about commodification of identity as well. And, we cannot say, biennials are like, taking their money from the galleries, where our publications are also taking the money of, I think we have been discussing quite a bit of capitalism in different ways, but we have to, we have to be very serious on our battle, because if all of a sudden we are romantic and say, yeah, we're going to destroy capitalism, then we lost the game,
We have to be realistic, we have to face the issue as well.
But we are facing the issue when we say about changing you can't find capitalism, you can't fight it.
I would feel that
Why Contemporary Plus takes the money from galleries to survive? Why Contemporary Plus relies on advertising from galleries? Why your publication relies on advertising from galleries? Yeah, and. Yeah.
We have some. We have,
no, you have quite a bit.
We have sold some apps.
Yeah.
But we are not. We don't fund the magazine. We don't.
You're funded by IFA, which is a German funding body. It's completely. You're not only funded, but you're founded also in a way by IFA. And, that's very serious. The German governmental body founded Contemporary Art. You understand what I'm saying? So let's be serious. Yeah. No, I mean, we have to be serious when we want to find capitalism, It's like we have to be very serious of what we're saying,
There's also, where is the edge of the definition of capitalism? Because it seems to overlap a lot with visibility. The idea that you should be seen, that your artistic practice should be seen at all, is distinct from self-promotion somehow. It's about a conversation and an audience. You can go and hide in a hole in the ground, and then you are absolutely not capitalistic. But are you always capitalistic if you want your work to circulate and be seen? I don't think so. Really?
There's someone.
There's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Why don't you discuss among each other?
I was just gonna the solution. Tony gave the solution.
Make a capitalism destroying group.
But Tony gave.
I want. Sorry. Well. I just wanted to make a comment on this idea of destruction that you brought, Tony. Yeah. And I know you don't mean destruction in a literal sense. I understand this. But it also connected what Charles Esche was saying when he made this metaphor of the West looking in the mirror and that the West only exists in the mirror. Maybe you could respond to some parallels. But I just wanted to add, it's also destruction of histories and destructions of monuments that creates illusions. And I want to bring attention to the fact that this sort of erasure of history or that part of the work that we need to be doing is to rewrite histories from a point of view of this transcontinental or transnational perspective, and that this could also be a form of fighting these illusions that you're talking about, or fighting power in a way. So maybe I just wanted to turn that metaphor or provocation that you gave us on its head a bit. And I think also that's something that different people have brought attention in yesterday. And also what Christina brought attention when she talked about Russia and China being a omission in the narratives, and how we could think of power in a way. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of confused looks, so maybe I'm not speaking clearly.
So you're advocating for destruction, say, of monuments or places?
I was saying, I was actually thinking specifically that destruction of monuments creates illusions. For instance,
could also be
it creates illusions.
Exactly. So maybe not using this terminology, or just calling attention to the fact that.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but there's a monument here against National Socialism, in remembrance of those victims who were killed by National Socialism. Do you know where it is? It's facing the train station, right? And it's quite well hidden, not intentionally, but I mean, it's not in a prominent place that people can see it, but it's there. And it talks about if I remember correctly, about the city acknowledging its guilt in what happened, and then it goes on to enumerating the victims, those who were killed by National Socialism, the Jews, the homosexuals, the communists, the gypsies, they say the Roma. They enumerate all the people who were killed by National Socialism, and then it ends by never again. So that's a monument, ending by something that happened and saying never again. Where is your never again now? in Europe? Where is it? Where is it? The never again, where is it? I mean,
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a good closing point.
No?
Marina, where is the never again? It's a great. Yeah.
Won't be a good closing without me saying a few more words. So, starting with Tony, very, 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 very nice of you to bring up the troubles of the region. But what was missing from the picture you painted was the erratic behavior of Saudi Arabia and Israel alongside Iran and the brutal regime of Syria.
I spoke of both. I spoke of Saudi Arabia and I spoke of Israel later.
Yeah, it's just the whole region is erratic. In terms of, and I want to Emeka, I want to actually give you like a polemic, and it will be something like I want to stand up for a form of universalism that actually is needed if this type of acknowledging otherness and differences needs to be taken seriously and doesn't turn into more and more fracturing of identities and sort of like multiplication of tribalism. The reason why at the same time that we need the acknowledgement of differences, we need universalism is that a lot of the big problems we're dealing in the world are actually universal problems. So it's not like universalism based on us being the same, but that as inhabitants of this planet, we're facing universal problems, such as climate change, such as an impending health crisis worldwide, which will come into effect in a coming decade. These are just like the natural one, right? The question of
gender and sexuality issues also.
Totally, or like the question of who owns our data, who is responsible for maintenance of these personal archives, what's going to happen to these in the next few decades, the question of income inequality, the question of war and peace. These are universal questions that deserve not universal solutions, but universal thinking, collective thinking, a kind of thinking that will imagine humanity not as this thousands of different tribes that are all vying for attention or visibility, but a universal that can be abstracted to think about these problems. So we also need, on the other side of this acknowledging difference, we need universalism, but not the old universalism and enlightenment, of course, a new kind of universalism.
So, yes, certainly. I mean, there's nothing in my suggestion that that advocates for sort of like that difference and everybody be on your own. It's more like, the kind of subjectivity to arrive at the kind of subjectivity that is at the service of something greater than us, which is the collective, the communal. But first of all, we have to respect that subjectivity. We have to respect the context, because there's something about context that gives birth to reality, and there's something about reality that is about context. And sometimes we can't flatten other people's subjectivity because we are trying to relativize. Oftentimes when we do that in the context of the West, is basically the West is neutral and everything else is variable. So when we do that, oftentimes I'm in a conversation and I go, look at what happened to me. Say, oh, the person doesn't allow me to finish. The person goes, oh, it's the same thing in China and the same thing here. No, it's not. I'm telling you something in Lagos. Let me finish. It is context specific. Hear me out. You're trying to tell me that it's all the same. And it's that kumbaya that is very dangerous. And that person is well-meaning. The person is trying to make relations. But I think that in the context of that, it's really like to take that neutral, and say, well, So I think that this is something that it's in that light that I speak, that we have to preserve each other's subjectivity, allow it a space, and but most importantly, and I think this is the second part of it, is that it has to be at the service of something greater, and this is where I agree with you that we have all these common problems that's going to bring us together.
But there was yesterday this map that was put up of all of the protests that have happened in the world for the past 50 years. And I remember we were discussing this afterwards. it looked like, just by looking at this map, you could think of that there's a global or like a coming together into protest, but actually they're all in their little place. So there is very little connection between, now there's riots in Bucharest and maybe there's riots somewhere else, but we don't communicate about these things. But these kind of maps maybe give you the impression that there is a global uprising, but in reality they're all in their little place. So maybe there is something to be thought of how these things can be connected and made into global
They're not
uprising.
mutually exclusive. I mean, context, I completely understand, but it does not exclude the fact that there is something universal in the sense that there is one capitalism, there is one capital. Global capital is everywhere and it is one. I mean, it's not like different or like sometimes it was fashionable during the 90s to talk of different modernities and multiple modernities. And today you insisted on the notion of histories. And so I understand this and they're not, I mean, I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying like sometimes we fragment things so much, so because of context, but it is necessary to fragment but then you have to keep in mind that there is like one, like the enemy is one. I mean, at least for me, the enemy is one. It's not like there's 700. There's just one.
Yeah, but I also agree with you that you really cannot, in a direct sense, fight capitalism in that way. I mean, it's.
Oh yeah, we're not going to fight it.
But I think it was Franz Fanon that said something like, that the conversation will not be, in the future, the conversation will not be about, socialism or capitalism. It will be more about the distribution of capital and how we are doing, making deliberate, decisions to help distribute those capitals to where it's supposed to go to. So I don't know, I think that for me, that's how I see it in this whole capitalism thing that, and of course, I think it's in line with even Walter Miolo's idea of like, okay, the whole idea is not to, dismantle Western hegemony in that sense. It is to make it just one more option, So there is no, and I think that capitalism is something that is very much ingrained in our world now and in the West. So, but I think the whole idea is to just make it one more option, and in that multi-optional world.
Yeah, just I don't think capitalism is restricted in the West anymore. Yeah. I think it's a much more universal. Actually, we see, but to go back to what Mo was saying, I think it's true that fragmentation gives over-fragmentation, although we are all gives lead to all this fascistic, movement to rise. The ones, for me, I'm 100% somehow convinced about this because, let's say, the global dawn in the Golden Dawn in Greece, global also, what they go for is difference, family, home, the notion of home, otherness, it's everything that, also we are trying to do through fragmentation. So I think we have always to keep challenging our conscience of the world beyond our solitary truths, while keeping our solitary truths. But we have to challenge constantly. This is what Rolling says about the capitalistic unconscious inside us, colonial unconscious also, colonial capitalistic unconscious. We have to challenge ourselves beyond our solitary truths, beyond our subjectivities, I think, sometimes.
Question from the back.
I think mine is not a question, is a comment about this panel. I think I'm so sorry, but I feel that this panel have like a lack of something that I can call archaeological perspective, because you have been talking about different concepts first without defining them, and it seems like you are starting using this concept, but unfortunately there are others in the past that have been using this concept. For example, you are talking about the inclusion, different perspectives, different regions of the world, but there is, since 18th, yeah, there is this concept of horizontal art history created by this Polish art historian, that he said that the way forward to start art history is not concentrated on the small or the influential centers, but to see how these centers are linked to other small or other centers without out of these big centers. So I think what we are discussing here, unfortunately, have been discussing since yeah. So I think it's better to maybe to frame and somehow to be more like objective. It's better to maybe somehow, when it's possible, make some connections. And also, because if we are here, this kind of like a tabula rasa that we are starting, I think this is my feeling. I'm sorry if I make someone feel bad.
I'm sorry too.
Yeah.
I would like to just also, I was a little bit, there were so many things that were touched, but I like that Tony brought up a little bit of mysticism, because I think in art and art production is missing, because everybody as art historians or curators often talk about objects of art, and then we label some identities on it or fragmentations of the identities or whatever the thing be. But very little was taken into account art processes. Like, for me, important definition of art comes from Augusto Boal, who defines art as a capacity of artist to transport itself into otherness. And then the art object is an accidental sort of outcome of it, which is on the end used or not used, irrelevant or relevant. And that's why a lot of practices were fascinating in these 2 days that dealt with the process instead of with the object directly. And I think the fact that small people and one-on-one and small initiatives as well are dealing with that is to try to go and bring the art processes as a solution rather than objects of art, then we can classify whatever.
But just to comment on that, I think that the artists who were presenting their work were quite explicit about the process behind it. I mean,
that's fascinating.
I said so. Okay, so that it was. I thought you said that we didn't focus on process.
I said that is the solution.
Okay.
Instead of looking at the
Sorry,
objects,
I misunderstood.
we should actually summarize what we saw today in 2 days and look at the art as art process rather than art objects. They are, on the end of the story, irrelevant. Art objects are irrelevant. The processes are the key, and that should be the foundation of art history or whatever we talk about.
Sorry. Okay.
I would like to come back to what Emeka was saying. Forgive me if I speak again, but it's a very interesting debate. It's been great 2 days. Thank you, Hildegund and Kimberly. Because when you speak of context, and then Mo brings in the question of universalisms today and what they might be, I would add, by the way, the organ trade as another issue that is very much under the radar at the moment. I wonder whether we can dislodge certain ethnological categories as easily as we think might be possible. And one of these categories, or one of the points of traction that have come out of the logos of ethnos, is context. Yeah? And it's on the basis of the knowledge of ethnologists who use the contextual, if you like, trump card, that the absence of adjacency takes place within collections like the ones I was talking about. So my question to you would be, if you had an open access, open source situation, would you insist that only Igbo people go to see Igbo work and interpret the context of an Igbo artwork from the past or from the present? Or do you, the problem for me in the last 2 days is not that we haven't mentioned the word capitalism. I actually think it was mentioned by Feigenfeld yesterday quite explicitly. We haven't spoken about the return of ethnos and the logos of ethnos. And that for me brings with it a flood of tribalisms, of contextual specificities, of, if you like, a paranoia that you're going to lose something if you allow somebody else to come too close to the specificity of the context which you want to defend.
But anyway, it's interesting that you pointed out Igbo, because for a long time, this is a question I've asked myself: what does it mean to be Igbo in a they call it a political contraption called Nigeria? But one thing I've come to realize and accept is that the Igbo culture or the Igbo identity is one of fluidity. So it is not an identity that speaks only onto itself. You have Igbos everywhere, basically. You will have some of them in Salzburg here, in China, in Japan, in the moon, maybe. And wherever you see them, they speak the language there. They do that where they speak the language fluently, and then the next minute, he's calling home. Nahafa, he's speaking his own language. So it's that fluidity. And I think I'm also thinking about this in relation to Edward Glisson's Poetics of Relation, where he talks about, root, root, not, as rhizomic. It is not the root that kills other root around it. So it is not the context that sort of like stifles other or says, no, I don't want you near me. It is one that is in relation. So, and he spoke about that, he expanded on that, and it's in that sense I'm talking about it. It's not a return. It's really, I have this, knowledge of, ideas like Edward Glisson and, Stuart Hall, who talked about, the way he sees globalization, or is that if, someone is asked the question, where are you from? He expects a long story, And for me, it's in that sense that I see the context, not like the root that kills all the roots around.
But do you see, but maybe asking both of you, do you see this rise of ethnologism in connection to also rise of nationalism? Like, can you pair it perhaps in different contexts? I guess it would mean, is it like a similar phenomenon that you are describing?
Another word that hasn't been mentioned, which is mentioned in nearly every art conference now, is indigeneity.
No one has used that word. Source communities, indigeneity. I mean, these are words that have to do also with essentialisms that are coming back at the moment, which are very important in specific, contexts or locations or sites that are problematic in other locations.
Yeah, and just to make the misunderstanding, ethnos is nation. So your question is there tautologically the same? Ethnos means nation.
Nation?
Nation. I mean, that's what ethnos means in Greece. Your ethnicity is your nationality.
But I think this is perhaps a term more specifically used in ethnographic context.
Right, but that's why, from my point of view, I'm taking this fragmentation and the return of ethnos as nationalistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but in what sense? For example,
ethnos is nation.
Yeah.
Like my ethnos is Greece.
The way I see it is it's like the argument that ensued between Trevor Noah and this French ambassador, where he really called him out on the fact that basically the point he was making is that Western hegemony cannot process duality, and we are really there now where there's this duality. There's a people that is here and elsewhere, at the same time. It's no longer schizophrenia. it's no longer one or the other. You know, you're like both. So I like to see it in this context of, you know, discussing or owning that duality, as opposed to, you know, like the same we're returning to nationalism or nation in that sense. I think in the same time, you know, there are people who are sort of like owning that schizophrenia, so to speak. You know, as I don't think it is going to. Well, my thinking is that the nature of it will not allow for another kind of nationalism in that sense, but rather some micro communities and, you know, context-specific micro.
Yeah, because the tension behind nationalism is precisely, I mean, it's good and it's bad. I mean, it's not, you can't really, I think what the point was that somehow maybe there is a good intention behind it, as in to kind of create a, well, maybe not, but
that's kind of, I mean, I'm getting really, yeah.
No, but what I mean is that this kind of essentialism has got, I mean, the building of these kind of essences has been used as a tool, right, in a certain way. But then the tension behind it is precisely that it's the discourse of the right and of the far right and so on. I mean, I don't know if I'm making myself clear. Maybe I'm not.
We have another question.
Sorry. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if it's really a question or maybe observation. The feminism, the new wave of feminism, it's a little global in a way. It's creating a lot of new tools, critical tools to decodify the way that patriarchy, the male chauvinist, it's remaining for more than 4,000 years everywhere, not everywhere, but many parts of the world. And it's interesting because in Brazil, we are facing a very powerful black feminist wave, and they are teaching us a lot about really important questions and keywords, and I didn't listen much about one of, for me, is nowadays the key word to understand a lot of these economics, the cultural economy, which is privilege. The only people who mentioned were the black people in this audience and also in the. So I started to think about this. I mean, what, for instance, when the white feminists say that is mansplaining, appropriating, a lot of terms that now we can see when it happens. So the black feminists, they are trying, white explaining, for instance, white appropriating, this kind of stuff, which is simplistic in a way, but it's very effective to see. So I would like to know how, I don't know, how we, yesterday, which was very important, very nice, the talk of Charles, when you look at our murals every day, of course, it's a subjective, but there are some things that are not subjective. They are very concrete, as the color of your skin. Okay, so I don't know, I was thinking about this. When we look at the mirrors every day, and sometimes I think about, okay, Christina, what your white privilege made for you today, or, for instance, I don't have... I'm from Brazil, I'm a white Brazilian, but I don't have, for instance, European passport. No, can I finish? Sorry. It's just because, no, don't interrupt, because this is always what happens. I mean, when a woman is speaking, a man, or when this happened a lot. So, no, it's serious. I mean, I'm open my heart to you. So I started to ask myself what my privilege as a white and educated person made for me today. But for instance, I don't have a European passport. So I was curious to know if any of you at some point just think, today, being a European, speaking a very how can I say, hegemonical language, what this made to me today. I don't know, it's just I was thinking, and I'm thinking because of a lot of discussion that's happening in South America. We are again facing fascism. We are again, as women, trying to make, for instance, abortion not a crime. And a lot is not subjective, it's concrete, you know, and it's about privilege. Yeah, I know, I brought a lot of things to be more pedagogical, but that's it. I would like to, if you could discuss privilege. It's a very important currency.
Somehow I think we can't discuss everything here, actually.
Oh, okay, sorry. Then maybe the next one.
It's not a joke. It's not.
Yeah, it's not a joke.
There is no joke in that. But I was actually, because I heard her in the morning, and she referred to herself as white, and she is from Brazil. And I don't think it's white. It's not about. I mean, am I white? Am I white? In the sense that. But this is something.
Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in right now because I feel, Will, I get what you're trying to say, and I wish that actually I had given a presentation that I wanted to give, but I thought maybe it would be more interesting to actually not think about history so much when we're talking about it, but to think about methodology, because there's a lot of people here doing decolonial work, and we all know how difficult it is, how isolating it can be. And how there's a lack of language sometimes available to us, and also the complicity of the networks that we survive on. So I wish that I had actually, so a lot of my research is based on the art fair biennial industrial complex. So when I say the art world, I'm talking very specifically about an art world that's constructed from a global network of art fairs, biennials, and galleries and museums. And this all has its roots, of course, in the nation-building projects of the 19th century, and it has its roots in the 1851 exhibition, Great Exhibition of Works and Industry in London, which was a very racist exhibition, actually. So you're absolutely right. We are operating on a landscape that is totally inscribed with colonialist dynamics. We have a very big battle ahead of us. It's almost like weeds, right, Rachel? I mean, it's almost like the task at hand is that we are on this field, and we're doing our work. And actually a lot of it has to do with weeding out, a lot of it has to do with deconstructing, a lot of it has to do with fragmenting. There's many different fronts that we're all working on. For example, with me, I am the opposite in the sense that I absolutely agree context is very important. I remember 10 years ago, an international magazine telling me it wasn't. And for me, as a post-colonial body, coming from a colonial existence, it was everything to me. But at the same time, I can understand why we need to have a universal register too. Why can't we have all of them? You know, that way maybe we would actually stop fighting and saying the same things over and over again. And actually it's quite interesting because the left has the same problem. You know, right now we're having this conversation right now in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn. So actually you're right, it's a very serious conversation, but I think also it's such a big one, do you know what I mean? That we've all kind of come here and offloaded, as we always do, because it's very rare that we get to come together to speak. So that's just my input, sorry.
Okay. I think we have to make this the last question or comment.
Yeah, it's a combination of a question and a comment, but one thing I noticed from this conversation is I feel like we've created our own binary in this past hour or so between talking about kind of isolation or thinking about nationalism or context as something where nothing moves, and the situation where we want to be in where there's more cultural exchange. And we've kind of termed this ideal thing the universal. And I feel like just using the term universal in and of itself as the ideal is a bit dishonest. And I feel like it's dishonest because we're not taking into consideration how historically the universal has been constructed. Yes, we would like universal to be this approach in which there is exchange across board, but the fact is this has not been what universal meant for centuries. For the longest time, what universal meant was that you were looking at the world, yes, but you were looking at it from a specific place. You were looking at it specifically from a Eurocentric perspective. So we cannot just say that the opposite of kind of tribalism or nationalism or a limited perspective is universal. You know, in the same way that we've complicated all these other terms, we also need to recognize that universal has been problematic, and then we can move on from it. If we just try and use it as the solution without considering or without considering what came before and without trying to change it, then in a way we're doing ourselves a disservice. And with that, one question that I have also, going back to words like universal, is why we have chosen this one. You know, because I think we can all agree that us sitting in this room is not the first time that people have thought about culture and cultural exchange. And there's a long history of people who have done this work, thinking about what kind of words they should use. Should it be universal? Should it be planetary? Should it be transcultural, which is also something that we've used? And transcultural itself as a word kind of, if you're using trans, if you're using movement, acknowledges that there are borders. Is it intercultural? Is it international? Is it, you know, what kinds of words we're using? And that's not a conversation that we've had so far, but it's something that we should consider. So yeah, I mean, I think the work that we're doing is amazing and we shouldn't get caught up in words, but still we need to think about them a lot more than we have in the past 2 hours.